Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we'll be doing a full in-depth guide on Zilean. In case you're new to the channel, I'm a multi-rank 1 challenger mid laner and also played pro play for 4.5 years. Zilean is really underrated. He has a very unique play style. Even though he doesn't directly carry the game, you can still have really high impact on your games in solo queue, and I think he's pretty fun to play as well. As always, everything is timestamped below, so let's get into it. Starting out with runes on Zilean, there are a couple really good pages, and the first is the summon area page. I think this is what you should use in 95% of your games. I think it is the best page overall. So summon area is actually quite nice. You can proc the shield with your E, and obviously you can proc the damage with your Q. So I think summon area is the best keystone overall, but we will talk about spellbook in a bit as well. Mana flow, basically the best. You kind of just need the mana. The other options sort of suck. Transcendence, again. CDR, like ability haste, is much more important on Zilean than AP, because the only things that scale with AP are your R and your Q, so not your W or your E at all. So generally ability haste is really, really valuable. So obviously we'll be picking this up. Now here's kind of your first choice. So we have like Scorch or Gathering Storm. It's very easy to be like, okay, Zilean doesn't really have a strong lane, so it's probably better just to go Gathering Storm. But you can actually use Scorch as a defensive option, sort of. So in a way, having Aerie and Scorch in the early game makes it much harder to take advantage of Zilean's weak early game. And again, we don't get a ton of value out of Adaptive Force, like out of the AP. So it's not like guaranteed that we go Gathering Storm. In my mind, if you don't know what to take here, you probably just take Gathering Storm, just because it's going to be some guaranteed value. But I think if you're in a lane that you can either bully, or you're in a lane where you're going to get bullied and the damage you do back actually matters, then I would probably take Scorch. In your secondary runes, we're pretty much going to take Inspiration like 100% of the time. And in this tree, you have a few options. Magical Boots is really, really good because you don't really need them early in Zilean. They're going to be playing kind of defensively anyway, but you could drop them for something like Biscuits if you really needed to rush Merc Treads or something like that. Cosmic obviously is very, very good. You should take this, I think, most of the time. Again, Item Haste will be useful since you'll be building Everfrost a lot, and Summoner Spell Haste is obviously good for Flash and TP. You could consider other things in here. Again, we said Biscuits. Futures Market could be good if you're trying to rush an item, or DMAT if you really need a DMAT Cannons to stop your opponent from roaming. But I would just stick to this most of the time and you'll be fine. Now down here, here's another choice you have, which is between attack speed and ability haste. Ability haste obviously scales a lot better, but personally I find CSing with Zilean very rough in the early game. So I quite like the attack speed purely for CSing, but if you do want more scaling, you can just go for ability haste. The other page you can consider, which I don't think is as good, but does have some use cases, is Spellbook. So Spellbook is very good against assassins, because when you're against an assassin, swapping to a defensive sum in team fights is really, really valuable. Having an exhaust, a heal, something like that, it makes it a lot easier to deal with assassins. Obviously Zilean deals well with assassins anyway with his ult for the most part, but having extra sums is really, really nice. So Spellbook, I would say you could take Magical Boots or Perfect Timing. Perfect Timing is pretty good against some assassins like Zed and Fizz and stuff, so this definitely becomes a much more attractive option against assassins. Here, this really depends on the assassin you'll verse. So against roaming assassins, minion DMAT to DMAT cannons and keep them from pushing waves can be very, very nice. Futures Market to help rush out some health items can be really, really nice. Or Biscuits, like if you don't have any reason to take these two, basically. I would take Cosmic against assassins basically 100% of the time. There's not really much else that's useful here. Now for your secondary, this does get quite interesting. You can, if you like, the standard is just to go sorcery here, take Mana Flow, Transcendence. Although if you find the matchup is going to be really difficult, like they're really going to all in you a lot, you could go something like Bone Plating and Overgrowth. Like this would give you a lot more tank stats and make you harder to die in lane. Obviously you could go for a bit more scaling, something like Conditioning and Unflinching maybe. So there's a lot of options here. Resolve is quite good if you're against assassins, obviously, but this should definitely be, if you're going Spellbook, this is probably your standard secondaries. But yeah, overall, I think Aerie, take the Aerie page most of the time. If you're in an assassin matchup, Spellbook does get a lot of value as well. So for your starting items as Zilean, you have a few options. Corrupting Potion should definitely be your default. Zilean is pretty weak in lane, honestly, and he kind of needs to sustain in a lot of matchups in order to survive. So if you're in kind of an even or a losing matchup, or even some winning matchups, I would buy this most of the time just because you are going to be taking damage pretty much no matter what, and you will need the sustain in order to survive. You can get a bit greedier though in other matchups, so versus assassins, Doran's Ring can be quite good. Not every assassin, there are some assassins that will still try and poke you down. So like Zed is an example of an assassin that would try and poke you a lot before all-inning you. But if you're against an assassin that just purely wants to all-in, having extra max HP can be very, very nice. So I would recommend that. You can also go Doran's Ring in winning matchups for Zilean, but to be honest, there aren't that many matchups that Zilean punishes in the early game, so I would really only buy this if you're against an assassin matchup that wants to all-in you. If you're in a matchup where it's mainly going to be free farming, you're not going to take a lot of damage, like where both of you are pretty weak in the early game, so like Vhagar could be an example. It's like rare you're going to pick up kills in Zilean, so it's not that great to go for Doran's Ring in these aggressive matchups. Instead, I would opt for a bit more greed and look to start with the tier and 2 potions instead, and that helps you scale towards your first item just a little bit faster. For Zilean's early buys, he's similar to most other AP champions. If you took magical boots, obviously you don't have to worry about this, but if you don't have magical boots, try and pick up tier 1 boots earlier in the game just so you can dodge skill shots a bit easier. If you started another item like Corrupting Pot or Doran's Ring, make sure to get your tier on your first or second base. Now, Darksteel is really important on Zilean, so you should be buying this before your first completed item, I would say basically every single game. Darksteel obviously is just really good on AP champions because it's so gold efficient, but especially on a champion like Zilean where you shouldn't be losing the stacks, you definitely have the tools to keep yourself alive, and also you will just be picking up a lot of stacks in team fights because you have AoE abilities, and also obviously you can just get assists by buffing your teammates and stuff like that. So Darksteel, super broken, make sure you're buying it every single game. Lost Chapter obviously is the gold standard. If you can buy a Lost Chapter at any point, you probably should just buy it, and you're generally working towards this once you've done your housekeeping of picking up like tier and Darksteel and stuff like that. Just gives you a lot of mana, makes laning a lot easier, and you can start to clear the wave. After that, we have some early defensive options, which are Merc Treads, Kindle Gem, and Seeker's Arm Guards. This kind of just depends on what you're verse. Merc Treads can be very good against double AP mid jungles, especially if they have CC, so stuff like LeBlanc plus, an Elise or something like that, AP plus CC, just look for that sort of thing. If you're building, well, we'll talk about the mythics a bit later on, but if you're building a health mythic, Kindle Gem can be really good because it just builds into your first item and gives you defensive stats, so if you can avoid buying Merc Treads or Seekers and can just go Kindle Gem instead, I actually quite like that. I think it's really good. It just accelerates you towards your first item. That being said, there are some matchups like Syndra, Zoe, LeBlanc, etc., where Merc Treads are really valuable. Seekers on Zilean, it's okay. I actually don't like Zhonya's that much on Zilean. We'll talk about that in the situational items at the end. So I think most of the time that you're building Seekers, you should probably just build Kindle Gem instead. At least that's what I would do. But if you are going to be building a Zhonya's, again, we'll come to this at the end, then it's fine to build a Seekers in lane if you're against like some kind of AD all-in champion. Boot options on Zilean are very simple. We have Lucidity Boots, Merc Treads, and Sork Shoes. Now, Lucidity Boots should be bought probably about 90% of games. They're just the best boots by far. They give you ability haste, which is your most valuable stat, and also they're relatively cheap. Obviously, Merc Treads can be picked up if you're again against like an AP heavy team, or they have a lot of AP CC. This can be very valuable to pick up, especially in certain matchups. Finally, we have Sork Shoes. So Sork Shoes they're okay on Zilean. Like if you really needed to be like the one AP on your team, put out a lot of damage, you could go for Magic Pen. I would say that just Zilean is in general not really suited for that sort of playstyle though. But if you're the only AP on your team and you really do need to output a lot of damage, you can go Sork Shoes, but otherwise I think Lucidity Boots like 90% of the time. Zilean's standard build, start with the tier and then complete your mythic and tier 2 boots of choice. Most likely this will be Everfrost and Lucidity Boots. Gives you a lot of ability haste. The Everfrost active is very nice, but there are some other mythics we'll talk about in a moment. After that point, your build is pretty situational, honestly, but this is what I'd go for most of the time. So complete your Cosmic Drive and then upgrade your tier 3rd. After that, we just round out the build with Rabadons and Void. Again, these are situational and we'll talk about them at the bottom, but by this point you should have a lot of AP, so even though we only have a couple abilities that use AP, it's still worth buying. By 6 items, you would kind of expect people to have magic resist, so if you haven't already by this point, you would probably want to pick up a Void. For our alternative mythics, we have 3 options, which are Liandry's, Crown, and Ludens. Starting out with Liandry's, it's actually really good on Zilean. It gives you a lot of ability haste, just like Everfrost, but it also does quite a bit of damage for you. So if you're against a team where you don't need the Everfrost active, or you don't need the Everfrost AP, then Liandry's is definitely a higher damage option, especially if you're against tankier teams. So even though I have Everfrost in the standard build, honestly, Liandry's is really good as well. I would say it's not quite as good as Everfrost, like just in a standard game, but you should definitely be looking for a lot of opportunities to buy Liandry's instead. I'd say I buy Everfrost maybe like 40% of the time, and then maybe Liandry's another 30% of the time. So they're very close in power. Next is Crown. So this is like an item you actually have to think about. So on Zilean, your goal obviously is to ult other people most of the time. So the thing that Crown is really good at is making it so you never have to ult yourself. If you're against a comp where you feel like you're going to be forced into ulting yourself, generally that's bad, and you should probably look to build a Crown instead. There is another way of doing this, which is still to go one of these mythics and then just to go for a defensive like Zonya. And that way you can still itemize more aggressively. It really just depends on the kind of champ you're verse. Like if you weren't going to get value out of Zonyas, then we would probably have to go Crown for our defensive. But I don't buy this that often because I think most of the time you can just position better as Zilean. Like you don't have to be in the fight a lot of the time. But the TLDR for Crown is just if by buying Crown, you're not going to have to ult yourself this game and you otherwise would have to, then it's a very good buy. Our last alternative mythic is Ludens, and I don't really like this that much, but it has some uses. So most of the time when you want damage, you would just want Leandries instead. But if you're the solo AP on your team, you know they're not going to be building magic resist and the magic pen gets you a lot of value. And also you're playing in a comp where you actually need to put out damage. One, I would say it's better if you're a different champion in this sort of scenario. But if you do end up as Zilean in this scenario, solo AP, need to put out a lot of damage, then Ludens can be a really good option too. Finally, we have Zilean's situational items. So I think Zilean's itemization as a whole, it's pretty situational. I think you can't really go wrong with this standard build, but there's like a lot you can optimize. Now, the first situational item is actually Tear. So Tear is not 100% necessary on Zilean. It's like the mana is nice, but you don't 100% need it. And there's a lot of people that would just go say Everfrost, Boots, Cosmic, and then like Rabadon's Void, or they would just go another defensive item. So they might go like Everfrost, Boots, Cosmic, and then like Zonya or Banshee, and then Rabadon's Void, right? So the reason I really like Tear is one, I think having a little bit of extra mana makes it a lot easier to play, but also I feel like it really smooths out your build. The problem if you don't go Tear is your third item becomes really, really awkward. So it's like you either pick up a defensive item that you don't really get value out of, like Zonyas or Banshees, or you're picking up like Rabadon's Void super early, but I don't think like Zilean really needs that damage. And so it's like if you want ability haste, again, we're going for those defensives that you might not need. So I really think that going Tear, it gives you a really smooth third item on Zilean, and obviously this gives you more ability haste. So I really like the Tear, but if you do just want like to scale a tiny bit faster and not build Tear whatsoever, that is something you could try. Next, we have Magi's. So Magi's really good on Zilean, just like Darksteel. You're not going to die a lot. You're going to be getting a lot of stacks. I would say I buy Magi's most games on Zilean. You really shouldn't be dying more than like 1 or 2 times. So you get a lot of value out of it. You might want to stay away from it when you're new to Zilean and you're still like trying to figure out just like how to survive, you know, how to use your abilities and stuff like that. But when you get good at Zilean, you'll find yourself not dying much. Magi's is very, very valuable. Now we have the healing cut items. So if you've watched the channel before, you probably know I generally hate healing cut items as a mid laner, but they're actually really, really good on Zileans. And the main reason is that you can make use of Putrefier. So if you've got Aerie, you can shield other allies by using your E, which allows you to give them the Grievous buff. Also, your abilities are like AoE. Obviously, you've got your AoE Q, so that'll allow you to apply healing reduction to a lot of people. On top of this, the item is very cheap and gives ability haste. So as we were talking before about having like a sort of awkward third item, you could do something like Chemtech Putrefier third, and that would be quite good. I really think this is extremely good on Zilean. So if they have a lot of healing reduction, or sorry, if they have a lot of healing, definitely look for this because you get a ton of value out of it. Next, we have our defensive items, which is Zonyas and Banshees. I think most of the time you don't really need these on Zilean because you won't be the main target, and you'll probably just be ulting someone who is. That being said, like we said before, your goal is to ult other people. So if you feel like you're going to be the target and the Banshees or Zonyas is going to help you kind of keep safe from that, then they can be really, really valuable. I'd say the kind of place to fit that in your build would be to, if you're building Tear, then you would probably want to replace Cosmic with one of these items, or, you know, build Cosmic like later in the build. So you could go something like Everfrost, Boots, and then maybe like Zonyas, Cosmic Tear, like you could do something like that, or you could go Cosmic Tear and build Zonyas later. Like I said, we don't really need Rabadon's Void as much on Zilean, so the reality is you can buy this basically whenever you want in your build, or whenever you need it really, and same with Banshees. Last is Rabadon's Void. So Rabadon's Void on most champions is really, really valuable to pick up third and fourth item. They change your damage a lot, but on Zilean, damage is not the most important thing. Rabadon's is still valuable, like we said before, for the AP. Like having more AP in your ult obviously means you revive people quicker, and if you need damage on Zilean, like Rabadon's Void is definitely the way to go. But instead of these items, you can do a lot of different things. So you could go for more ability haste, you could go for more defenses. Like this could easily be like Chemtech and Zonyas. This could be, you know, you don't have to go both these items. It could be like Rabadon Zonyas, could be Zonyas Rabadons. So yeah, those are kind of the use cases for it. I think overall, like definitely stick to this as your standard build. But if you need any of these items, you can basically buy them pretty much whenever you want after your first item is Zilean. Like make sure you get these items here. And then after that, you basically just mix and match based on what you want. If you need more ability haste, we go like Cosmic and Archangels. If we need more defensive stats, then we look for defensive items, obviously. If we need healing reduction, we just plug that in. Don't be so focused on just having a set build of Zilean, but if you're not sure, just go with this. Sums on Zilean are super simple. You'll be taking Flash TP in 99% of your games. Zilean is very immobile, so having Flash helps a lot. You do have movement speed from your E, but again, you don't have any way to like get over walls or anything like that. So Flash is kind of required. Teleport also is pretty much a must-have. Again, Zilean's lane is so weak that you basically need TP in order to give yourself a laning phase. TP is very useful for refilling your corrupting pots, obviously just refilling your HP and mana. Just makes it a lot easier, and also because Zilean is more of like a secondary carry, it can be quite useful in the mid game to like TP to other lanes and stuff. The only other thing I would consider other than Flash TP would be Flash Cleanse. So if you're taking Spellbook, you could look to something like Flash Cleanse if you're against like really heavy gank setup or against Alessandra or something. I would honestly probably still try and greed and take Flash TP, but Flash Cleanse with Spellbook and then swapping to TP at level 6 or another sum as well could be an option. Now onto Zilean's abilities. So starting with the passive, you store XP every 5 seconds, and basically when you have enough XP, you can level up an ally, and that will give them the XP they need to reach the level, and it will also give you the same amount of XP. Now you can actually see how close you are to leveling up someone else by looking at this little like ring around them. So if I actually speed this up, you will see that the ring grows, as you store more XP, and then once you finally have enough XP to level them up, it'll turn yellow, and then you can right click on them and it will level them up. There are a couple good ways to use this. I think it's either try and feed all your XP into like your main carry of the team. So this could be like an AD carry, or it could be like a Hecarim or a Riven or something like that. Basically the person that you're going to be using all your buffs and speed ups and like ult on and stuff like that, try and put it on the same person. The other way you can do this is to try and give someone a crucial level before a team fight starts. So if you're about to fight Dragon, leveling someone up to level 11 so they get rank 2 in their ult can be really good. If it's in the early game, leveling someone from 5 to 6 can be very valuable, again, so that they reach their ultimate. So for the most part, just put it on whoever's like the most valuable member of your team, basically. But otherwise, there are a couple key breakpoints like 5 to 6 or 10 to 11 that can be worth leveling up someone for. Next, we have the Q. So the Q is a circle skill shot that actually sticks to targets, and then after 3 seconds, detonates for dealing damage. So you can like stick this to a lot of different targets. You can like stick it to jungle camps like this. You can obviously stick it to allies. You can stick it to enemies, and also people that walk over it will pick it up as well, including again allies, jungle camps, whatever. So like for example, you can pick up the bomb by walking in it, and then it'll be on you. This works the exact same for jungle camps or players or whatever. If you place it in their path and they walk over it, they will pick it up. The second part of Q is that if you place a second bomb on a unit that already has one, it'll detonate the first bomb straight away and it will stun enemies. So for this, we actually also need to explain the W. So the W is Zilean turns time, reducing his other basic ability cooldowns by 10 seconds. I think this ability is so cool. Such a cool concept. Basically, it means that if your abilities are less than 10 seconds, they're going to refund instantly. Otherwise, obviously, it's just knocking the cooldown off by 10. And so we will use this in order to double bomb people. So if you have a Q on someone, you can press W to reset your Q and then Q again, which will stun people in the radius around it and also deal damage to them. Next, we have the E. So the E can be cast on allies or enemies, and it will speed up allies and slow enemies for 2.5 seconds. You can also cast it on yourself. So as you can see here, if you cast it on yourself like this, cast it on allies, it will speed them up, and cast it on enemies and will slow them down. Very versatile spell. Something you'll have to think about a lot because it does have a lot of use cases. We'll explain a bit more in the combos, like how to use it, but it's a very interesting spell as well. Lastly, we have the ult. So this is probably what most people think of when they think of Zilean. Basically, it's like you mark a target allied champion for 5 seconds, and then if they die, they get put into stasis, so think like GA, and they can't take any damage like Zhonya's, stuff like that, and then it revives them and restores HP. So this is really good, but it is like a little hard to use, honestly. Basically, the way you normally use this is you will cast it on someone when they're like close to death, but not too close to death, obviously, that you miss it, and then they will revive and be able to keep on fighting. So as you can see, it's point and click. You just target it on an ally like this, and if they die within 5 seconds, they will be res. It does take quite a bit of practice to use Zilean ult, but the thing is, it's definitely better to cast it too early than too late. Obviously, if you cast ult and your target doesn't end up dying, that sort of sucks, but at the same time, you can think of it as giving them 5 seconds where the enemy team kind of doesn't want to hit them, so it's kind of like a 5 seconds like invulnerability. Not quite, but you know what I mean, right? Like it still gets some value even if the ult doesn't go off. So try not to cast it too late. The later you can cast it, the better, but obviously if you cast it too late and your target just dies, then it's completely useless. Your standard ability max as Zilean is to max Q first, W second, E third, and obviously put a point in R whenever you're able to. One thing that you can do in the early game is actually go Q, W, Q. Normally I don't put a point in E until level 4 because it makes your Q a lot stronger if you can put 2 points in it. But if you're trying to set up a gank or something at level 3, or you're just trying to play a bit more defensive, you probably do want to point in E at level 3. Now for actually maxing, as I just said, you normally go QWE, but the thing is, a lot of people actually go QEW depending on the team composition. So as you can see here, putting points in E is very, very valuable. It increases it by a lot. Same with W, like they're both very, very good abilities. So what you'll see a lot of people do is when they're playing with a champion that really benefits from movement speed. So champions like Hecarim or Rammus or Olaf, those kind of like bruisers that really like movement speed. Darius is another one. Or if you're playing with an AD carry that really benefits from movement speed, so something like Jinx, then they like to put like either just completely max E second or put 3 points in E second. I don't do this that often. Like I pretty much always just go for the QWE. I think it's like better overall, but there are definitely times when it's like I have like one carry on my team, they really benefit from movement speed. In that sort of case, I will just go for Q, then E, then W, and of course put a point in R whenever you're able to. So Zilean combos and how to use your abilities. Let's start off with the trading combo. It's not really a combo, honestly. You just want to look to Q your opponent when they go for a CS. That's definitely the best time. Zilean Q is a pretty long cooldown in the early game, so you don't really want to waste it. And if you can time it when someone's going for a CS, that makes it a lot easier. Your first actual combo, as we showed before, is just the QWQ. This is what you'll be using most of the time. You can also weave in an auto if you're able to in the early game. Obviously, this is just stuns. It's pretty easy. You can pull it off rather quickly. You'll be using this like throughout the entire game in the laning phase and team fights and skirmishes. So make sure you know how to do the QWQ combo. Another one that we can do is the EQWQE combo. So probably the way to max CC someone, other than like the triple bomb combo that we'll talk about in a sec, is to just start with each, so your target makes it a lot easier in order to hit your Q. You can then look for a QWQ and then slow them again at the end after the CC is faded. This is quite hard for your opponent to deal with. It's very good in the early and mid game. It's also very good for setting up ganks. So if you're able to get in range to use your E on opponent before using QWQ, that can be really good as well. But it does put you a bit closer and a bit more vulnerable. If you're going for Everfrost, you can load even more CC into your combo. So like before, start with the E, look for the QWQ, go for the Everfrost when the stun's about to run out. When the root's about to run out, that's when you put on your second E, and that just gives a ton of CC. It's also very hard to avoid, especially because they're slowed in the first place, allowing you to hit that QWQ very easily. Once you get enough ability haste and points in W, you can start doing the triple bomb combo. So the way to do this is, rather than just doing a regular QWQ like this, you're actually going to try space it out a little more. So I'll show you what I mean. So start off by Qing and then instantly pressing W, and then try and hit this Q like sort of late, and then you can get another Q here. So you can either space it out so that you get more kind of like more CC duration, or you can just look to do it a bit faster to kind of get the damage off. So you could, for example, just do Q, W like this, and then you could Q and W and instantly Q after, or you could wait it out longer for more CC. So it's like, why do we use the triple bomb combo versus the QWQ combo? Obviously, the QWQ combo is a lot easier to hit. Like, you kind of already have to be in range of someone to do the triple bomb combo. If you know someone is kind of like stuck, like you're already close to them, you have them E'd, you can probably just chain CC them with a triple bomb, and that will normally be better, obviously assuming you have enough ability haste. Otherwise, I think I definitely use QWQ more often because you can use it from further away and it's a lot easier. But again, like if you get close enough to someone, looking to lock them down with the triple bomb works really well. You can, of course, have Everfrost in this combo as well, so you could look for something like this, where you look for some stuns, then we look for another stun, follow up with an Everfrost after, you know, putting in slows whenever you're able to. You can keep someone CC for a very long time, so make sure you practice this and practice, so it's not that hard, but just get used to the timing. And kind of like get a feel for it, I guess. There are actually a few things you can do with Flash and Zilean. So the first one is to buffer your Q out of range, and then flash in range to instantly cast Q. So if you cast Q on your opponent, your character will automatically start walking towards them. If you flash into the range, your character will automatically cast Q straight away. So here, if you Q this target and then flash, Q will instantly go off. So that makes it basically as fast as you can possibly get it out. Obviously, it's still dodgeable because Q has a travel time, but that can be a good way to use it. Another thing you can do is actually flash into your bombs to instantly get a stun. So as you know, when 2 bombs stacked on each other, they will blow up. So if you QWQ here and then flash into it, it will instantly go off, stun the target and deal damage. So I don't see that very often on Zilean, but it could be something you consider. Probably the most common way to use flash on Zilean is just to flash within range to E them first. Then once they're slowed, you can look for a QWQ, or you can like, you know, look to space it out for a triple bomb. You can do basically whatever you want. It can also be a good idea to Q bushes as Zilean before you face check them. So obviously if you Q someone in there, it will give vision of them. Now, interestingly, the bomb itself has a small vision range. So if it's in a big bush, like sometimes you won't see someone at the other end of it. That being said, it's like a little generous sometimes. So you actually see that I saw this target here just for a moment. So a lot of the time they won't think you've seen them, but you actually will have. Obviously, if you can target it more in the middle, even if you don't hit them, you will get vision of them the whole time. So that can be really useful to abuse as well. There are a lot of different ways that you can use your QWQ creatively. So I'm just going to show a bunch of examples on the screen. So you can look to QWQ on minions in lane for a quick trade. You can QWQ in team fights on enemies or allies in order to get AoE stuns. You can also look to QWQ when either your teammate is getting res from your ult or when someone's coming out of Zhonya's or GA for an instant stun. It can be a really good idea to double bomb objectives or even triple bomb objectives, because a lot of the time there'll be a lot of enemies grouped around it. You can just put your bombs on the floor in order to zone people or control an area. Sometimes they will walk into it as well. You also don't always need to stack your Qs. Sometimes you can just put them on different targets in order to carry the bombs to different areas of the fights. You can put your bombs on a target that really wants to engage, and that can kind of like take the bomb into the team. So the sky's really the limit when it comes to how you want to use your QWQ. As you get more comfortable on Zilean, you'll definitely start to see these kind of creative plays become more obvious to you. But if you're just starting, like, don't overthink it. Just look to make sure you're getting consistent QWQ value, and then eventually you'll be able to do some pretty crazy stuff. When you play the early game in Zilean, you're mainly just trying to get as much CS as you can and reach the mid game, like your first item, without falling too much behind. That's like a big reason why we go Corrupting Pulse and TP, because it's going to allow us to sustain back up and get a lot of CS. I would say in most matchups, as long as you're like within touching distance of CS, like you're actually ahead. Like I'd say if you're down 10 CS as Zilean, you're probably in a pretty good spot. Obviously this isn't super true if your opponent scales really well. But like, yeah, you can be pretty happy just to be down a little bit CS. Obviously, like if your opponent wastes a bunch of cooldowns, or again, like they're mispositioning, you can still look to harass them on CS, like I said before, or just, you know, move aggressively into them when they use cooldowns. But for the most part, you'll see here, I'm just like looking for harass when I can. Otherwise, have the wave coming to me, allowing me to farm, try not to take too much damage, and then I can kind of keep the wave here in a gankable position. After you get some points in Q, you can actually look to start trading back quite aggressively. It does depend on the champion, but a lot of champions can't really answer your EQWQ trade, so you can like just walk up to them, you can kind of kite them out and look for damage like that. And also by this point, if you don't actually want to play the 1v1, you probably have enough wave clear just to like QWQ waves, and you should have enough mana by this point that you can kind of ignore the 1v1. So yeah, if you can survive that like probably first 5 levels without just falling like majorly behind, then you're probably in a pretty good spot. You still can't like force solo kills on your opponent that well. Like most of the time they would just base before you kind of get them low enough. But if you can like chunk people out like a Zilean, like that's really good, obviously, because you're kind of meant to lose lane. So yeah, just look for those like EQWQ trades, or like look to QWQ some low HP creeps, as we said in the combo section, once you get to this point in the lane, and have the mana to start doing so. If you're in a bad matchup with Zilean, it's really fine to go down CS. You just kind of want to keep the wave on your side. Just make sure you don't die. As long as you can like keep yourself farming and try and keep the wave in a gankable position, just so they feel a bit more pressure than what you would put out. As you can see here, I make a big effort to freeze the wave. Yasuo was a very difficult matchup for Zilean, but as long as you keep the wave on your side, it's like you have a little bit of gank threat, because if your gank setup, you're pretty safe for farming, and he can't chase you down the lane. So this is very important if you're against, especially like assassins that are strong early, or these kind of like bruiser-esque fighter champs, you know, stuff like this, where you're sort of forced to just like play under your tower, but you can still trade a little. But yeah, try and keep the wave on your side. Definitely don't die. It's like the worst thing you could do. A lot of the time, champions that counter Zilean in lane kind of get destroyed by Zilean in team fights. So if you can fall down CS versus these champs, it's completely fine as long as you don't let them snowball. And you definitely want to itemize very differently based on the matchup. So there's some champs that would just try and spam push you in. So champions like Ryze, Victor, Azir, stuff like that. Against those champions, you really need a lot of HP and mana sustain, because a lot of the time they will be attacking both your HP bar and your mana bar. So you really need like the mana and sustain to keep up with these champs. Otherwise, you'll kind of spend the whole time like pinned under tower, and it's very difficult for Zilean to actually see us under tower. So you want to try and avoid that if possible. Obviously, not possible versus every champion. Another thing is if you end up versus a assassin champ like Fizz and stuff like that. Zilean really hard counters assassins in team fights, but in lane, assassins are actually quite good into Zilean because Zilean is so weak early. So again, try and stop those champions from snowballing. Itemize defensively, get like a Kindle Gem, get Merc Treads, just get basically one defensive item that you need in order to survive these matchups. And once you get to team fights, or if you get to the mid game and team fights completely even with an assassin, or even slightly behind in CS, you're just going to destroy them. So it's honestly a lot like Silas. Just make sure you don't fall behind in the early game, and then you'll be extremely hard to deal with for the entire rest of the game. Zilean teamfighting is really unique. That's pretty much where all the skill expression on Zilean comes from. So I really want to show you guys some examples, but first I'm going to kind of talk about like what the most important things for you to keep in mind are. So first off, Zilean does play sort of like a control mage, where ideally you want to position behind your team so that you're not the one taking damage. The reason for this is like you really need the fight to be long. You have low cooldowns, you can get like multiple rotations off, so the longer the fight is, normally the better it is for you. The first thing you need to think about is who you're going to ult on your team. If you've watched my team fighting guide, you'll know that I like to number the enemy team from 1 to 5 in order of importance. And I think you should do the same for your team. So your most fed members, your strongest members are going to be like your 1 and 2, and then your weakest or your most useless members are going to be at 4 and 5. Obviously, there's not really like a perfect rule you can follow, but just in general, ulting the people on your team that are strong, that have cooldowns, that have a lot of items, generally this will be better. Sometimes it can be worth ulting just the first person that's going to die, but like if, for example, like your support engages, uses all their cooldowns, there's not that much point ulting them unless, of course, you're not going to ult someone else, right? So as always, it is situational, but in general, you do just want to ult like whoever's fed on your team. The second thing that kind of goes with this is you want to think about, well, who on your team really benefits from your E? Is there someone on your team that really benefits from your E more than someone else? It could be that you really want to speed up an AD carry, or you might want to speed up a support that engages, or bruisers oftentimes use movement speed really well. And following on from that, you really need to think, okay, was there someone on the enemy team who was really crucial to slow? Enemy bruisers that would really struggle getting slowed in the fight, or perhaps an enemy carry that once they get slowed, kind of just like immediately has to flash, right? So basically, you're trying to weigh up these three things of, okay, who do I ult, and is it better to speed up my team? If so, which members? Or is it better to slow down the enemy team? And if so, which members? Let's get into this example. So what am I thinking about before this fight? Well, I have a fed Riven. I probably want to use most of my cooldowns on her. And also, if there's someone on the enemy team I want to CC, it's probably this Fiora and this Jinx. So I'm going to kind of play by play this fight, talk about my thoughts kind of as I'm making them, and hopefully that can give you some idea of how you want to team fight. So first off, Fiora's kind of running away from the fight. Riven's not really low on HP, so for now I'm just going to slow this Jarvan, try and put some of my cooldowns kind of on cooldown, basically, right? So here what I'm thinking is, okay, this Swain has appeared. He could be a good target to CC. Obviously, if we can CC Swain, it could be good to wait out his ult. I'm also thinking, okay, if this Riven starts taking a lot of damage, perhaps I'll look to ult her. So fight keeps going, I look for the CC on the Swain. Now I'm trying to hold my ult here for a bit longer, mainly because I know that these three champions here, they don't have a lot of burst. They have a lot of sustain damage, so I can afford to kind of delay my ult a bit. If they had a lot of burst, I would probably ult Riven straight away, otherwise she would die. But fortunately, I'm able to hold it for longer. We get the res on Riven. During this time, I'm also slowing Swain, as you can see. Now, Jinx comes along here, and I have a choice. I could double bomb these two people, but they're already pretty low. And I can't really double bomb the Fiora because she can parry my bomb instead. So I decided to double bomb this Jinx and kind of just hope my team can clean this up out here. And you can see that this actually keeps Jinx out of the fight for a pretty long time. Now I'm kind of just like too low, so it's a bit difficult for me to do stuff, but I'm going to still try and add some value with my bombs over the wall. As you can see here, I get the bomb on Jinx, also get the bomb on Rengar afterwards. I speed up the Ashe so that she can auto come over here, get another stun. So you can see like throughout this fight, I've gotten a lot of value in terms of like, obviously I've just dealt a lot of damage. I've also got a lot of CC off. I've used my ults and my E's on good targets. So that's why it's really important to stay alive a long time. And if possible, don't ult yourself. But obviously like if ulting yourself allows you to do this stuff, then you probably should. So yeah, let's move on to another example. Now this example is from the same game. Now what's different about this fight is that we have a fed Zeri this time. So in that previous fight, Zeri wasn't even in it. But in the last fight, it was like Riven was the only person I needed to think about, but now I kind of need to think about this fed Zeri as well. So I'm thinking, okay, my E is probably most valuable on Zeri for the extra movement speed, and Zeri also probably does more sustained damage than the Riven, so ideally I want to use everything on the Zeri, but maybe I can put some bombs on Riven. Now the fight starts and Riven kind of overcommits. She gets CC'd, she fail flashes, and she's just gonna die here for free. Even though it would probably be better for me to save my ult to Zeri in like a perfect world, I just should ult this Riven here. That way I get a lot of value out of it. Riven's gonna come back to life, gonna be able to actually do something with it. So you just like you shouldn't be 100% focused on like always using your ult on the perfect target. You do kind of need to adapt in the moment and sort of update your priorities as the fight goes on. So here, I go for the double bomb. I actually miss it, unfortunately. Otherwise, this would have been a double bomb onto these two. Kind of just like putting out damage at this point, trying to keep myself alive as well. I noticed that there's like no one really left here to stand in front of me, so I look to walk around instead, get another nice double bomb, which is good. Now, at this point, Riven has died, so my priorities have updated. It's like before, I had Zeri and Riven to care about. The fight's actually easier for me to think about now because the only person I really need to care about is this Zeri. So I'm pretty much playing for Zeri at the moment. I'm going to be using my speed ups on her whenever I'm able to. You can see here, just kind of speeding her up. Now they engage here and I get a really nice double bomb, which is super awesome. But the bad thing is that Zeri died. So once again, re-update my priorities. Who am I going to use my abilities on now? Probably Rengar. I don't think Ashe. I mean, I guess I could E Ashe if I were in range of her and maybe she could get more orders off. But yeah, probably not. I'm just going to use it on myself or Rengar. So here I just come get a bomb. I think we just like win this fight pretty much. Yeah, so that's the fight pretty much over. I think from this example, I really want you guys to see that you should be updating kind of your priorities on who you're gonna use abilities on, etc. Like as the fight happens. Sometimes team fights can be really, really overwhelming. So like here's a team fight where movement speed is very good on Yone and Hecarim. Could also be useful for keeping Seraphine alive. Obviously, Seraphine has really good extended fights along with the rest of them. So it's like, you know, I could use my E to keep Seraphine alive. I could use my E to allow like Hecarim, Yone to keep fighting. Rakan on the engage can be really good. Also, Eing the enemy team is really important. So they've got like a fed Riven who I can slow down and look to CC. Eing Alistair can stop him from getting out afterwards. And I also need to think about stuff like, okay, they've got a Zed. Maybe I need to ult whoever Zed ults. There's a lot to think about. When this kind of situation happens and there's just so much going on, what I try and focus on is just dealing with their like biggest threat and kind of helping my, I guess like my most important member of my team. So what I'm thinking here is, okay, this Riven is really, really important. I'm going to do my best to CC her throughout the fight. I'm also thinking, okay, who's the most important on my team to ult? Probably the Seraphine or the Yone. Like these are the two really important keys right now. Keeping the Seraphine alive for longer auras or the Yone for more damage. So I'm basically just going to ult whoever needs it first. So let's see how the fight plays out. I speed up the Seraphine. She gets Zed ulted, but I decide that she's pretty much fine. She's got a lot of HP here. And I'm really thinking, okay, I want to use my bombs on this Riven as she goes in. So I get the CC on the Riven. That's great. And you'll see most of this fight that I'm just eating the Riven, making it really difficult for her to kind of do stuff. So you can see Riven basically can't move. I also think that my Yone is about to ult in 1v5, so I actually have to ult that guy, even though I probably would have preferred to ult the Seraphine. And yeah, for the rest of the fight, I'm pretty much just trying to CC Riven non-stop. You'll see I'm making Riven's life very difficult. She's like pretty much permanently stunned or slowed. And so ultimately the fight ends up like pretty much even though we're kind of behind. But yeah, I kind of wanted to show this one just because sometimes there is a lot to think about and you guys might struggle with like thinking about all these different things. But I really think to kind of summarize everything, if you can, before the fight, try think like, okay, who's the most important to ult? Basically, who's the most important on both teams to use my E on? Should I be using my E on my team or their team? And then at the end of it, just like be ready to kind of update things throughout the fight. Ultimately, while it's better to use stuff on better targets, right? As long as you are actually using your stuff and keeping yourself alive, you're doing most of it. You know, if you die instantly, that's like really, really bad. But even if you're using your abilities on the wrong targets, as long as you're actually alive and using them, you're like 80% of the way there, and at that point you can worry about optimizing it further. Now on to Zilean's matchup. So Zilean is very weak in lane and struggles with honestly most meta mid laners. That being said, he is actually pretty good at neutralizing. Like he's not going to get priority versus these champions. He's probably not going to get a CS lead, but Zilean is pretty good at not dying, obviously because of his ult, and he also has a fair amount of wave clear. So a lot of the difficult matchups you can still neutralize fairly well. Now, there are a lot of matchups on this list that are very difficult in lane, but are actually really good in teamfights. So a champion like Fizz or a champion like Yasuo, these are insanely difficult to lane against, and you should expect to fall behind. That being said, if you get into the mid game and you're down 20 or even 30 CS, you might actually be ahead in terms of the game state. Generally, Zilean is very good at dealing with champions that either need to burst because you can ult, or that need to extend a DPS because you can slow them down. Really, the thing that Zilean struggles with the most in teamfights is actually range. So again, champions like Azir that scale well and have a lot of range, they can be very, very hard to deal with. Another example of a champ like that could be something like Corki. So Corki's pretty easy to lane against, obviously, or Veigar, both of these, because they're quite weak in the early game. But they're actually kind of difficult to deal with later on in the game because they can deal a fair amount of damage from pretty far away. Obviously, Corki's got his poke, Veigar's got his cage, he can look to stun multiple members of the team and AoE them down. That's another thing that Zilean sort of struggles with, is if the enemy has so much AoE that it's sort of difficult to ult one target, that can be quite hard. So, if, for example, they have something like a Fed Annie, it's actually quite hard to deal with because she's just going to ult your team and they're all going to die at once. But if Annie doesn't get fed, then Zilean does quite well into Annie because you can just ult whoever she ults. So I would say, just as a whole, the most difficult matchups are going to be the ones that are strong early and scale. So champions like Azir are very difficult, or just champions that have a lot of range. If you're against a champion that is very strong against you in lane, or is just strong in lane in general, like Aurelia, Lucian, stuff like that, you will normally do very, very well against them in the mid game. So as always, if you're against any of these champions, try and play safer. Just try not to fall behind. You'll probably do well against them in team fights. Honestly, you can blind pick Zilean. I think he is able to neutralize enough matchups to make it to be worth it. And also, he's not a champion that's really tied to the laning phase. Like, he doesn't need to get ahead in order to win the game. So the matchup mid is less important overall. So guys, that is going to be it for this video. Hopefully you did enjoy it and learn some stuff. I think that this guide actually took me a pretty long time to make compared to some of my other ones. There was just a lot of kind of unique things about Zilean that I really had to think about how I'm going to put into words, or how I'm going to explain this to people. You know, I had to get a lot of examples of team fights. I also had like a lot of examples of like the different QWQ combos that you could do and stuff like that. So it was definitely different than some of the other guides I've before. But yeah, like I said, hopefully you guys did enjoy it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.